My kids were so excited about the treehouse we built together in the backyard, until Karen from the HOA decided that it didn't conform to neighborhood standards. At first, it was just annoying notes on my door. Then, formal complaints. But one day, I woke up to chainsaw noises in the backyard. Karen and her husband were destroying everything with their bare hands. I called the police, but the story only got worse. Building that treehouse was one of the happiest moments of my life. My children were overjoyed. A little refuge in the backyard, where they could imagine they were pirates on the high seas or astronauts exploring distant galaxies. We did everything together, from choosing the best branch to hammering the boards, painting, and even the little flag at the top. It wasn't a work of art, but it was perfect for us. Then she came, the guardian of the neighborhood's rules, the protector of aesthetic harmony, the woman who, apparently, had nothing better to do but monitor other people's lives. At first, they were just notes. Ah, the lovely notes. Little pieces of paper with letters printed in Comic Sans sneaked under my door. The first one said, "Dear neighbor, the wooden structure in your yard does not meet HOA standards. Please arrange for its removal as soon as possible." The second. That's the second notice. "The structure in your yard is substandard. Please arrange for its removal before more serious measures are taken." And so on. You get the idea. I, being a citizen with 2 functioning neurons, did what anyone would do. I ignored it. After all, it was my yard, my property. We weren't building an oil refinery there. It was just a tree house. But she didn't like being ignored. And when this woman feels that she doesn't have absolute control of the situation, strange things start to happen. First, the formal complaints began. I received an email, then another, then an official summons from the HOA, the Residents Association, informing me that I had to attend a community hearing. I laughed. Community hearing? For a treehouse. I arrived at the meeting, and there she was, sitting at the head of the table like an empress giving orders to her empire of bored pensioners and housewives. "This structure is a risk," she said, with that tone of indignation that only very busy people can cultivate. "You're violating the neighborhood's aesthetic code, and you could be fined." I took a deep breath. I tried to be civil. I explained that the house was safe. It was in my backyard and it wasn't bothering anyone. I asked, with all the patience in the world, what the real problem was there. She looked at me as if I were an alien fresh from Mars. "The rules are the rules," she said, crossing her arms. Ah, yes, the ultimate argument. The rules are the rules. The meeting ended without any consensus. I continued with my treehouse, and she continued with her silent hatred. But I should have realized that it wasn't going to end there. People like that don't accept losing. A few days later, I woke up to a strange noise in the yard. Something like wood cracking? I jumped out of bed, opened the curtain, and froze. There she was, together with her husband, a man who looked like he'd stepped straight out of a retired golfer's catalog, tearing down the treehouse with their bare hands. And that's when the real war began. It took my mind a few seconds to process what was happening. It wasn't possible. Nobody would be that crazy. But there they were. She, with a satisfied smile on her face, and her husband, holding a chainsaw as if he were a character from a fifth-rate horror movie. They were actually dismantling the treehouse. My treehouse. I left the house like a hurricane. I don't even remember what I shouted, but it was loud enough to make the birds in the surrounding trees fly away. "Have you gone mad?" She turned to me with the expression of someone who was simply mowing the lawn, as if nothing much was happening. "You ignored the notifications, so the HOA had to take action." She said it as calmly as she could, as if she were commenting on the weather. I looked at the treehouse, or rather, the remains of it. The structure was already half dismantled, pieces of wood lying on the ground, the roof hanging to one side. Her husband, this specimen of blind obedience, was holding the chainsaw and looking at me, waiting for instructions, as if I was going to give him my blessing to finish destroying everything. You've invaded my yard. You're destroying my property. That's a crime. I was shaking with rage. She snorted. Snorted, as if I was being the unreasonable one there. Don't be dramatic. The HOA has the right to ensure that the rules are followed. Ah, yes. Of course. The sacred scripture of the HOA. That set of rules written by some bored soul who thinks he can rule the lives of others. I had already lost patience. I took out my cell phone and started filming. Get out of my yard now, or I'll call the police. This time, her husband seemed to hesitate. Perhaps the man had a spark of common sense. But her? Oh, she wouldn't back down. You can call. The HOA is within its rights. Great. I picked up my cell phone and dialed. While I waited for the call to connect, I looked around. My children. They were standing in the doorway, wide-eyed, watching the scene. My youngest son was holding a little sign he had painted himself, which read, "Secret Barracks." My heart broke. I wanted to protect them from this kind of thing. But there was that woman, destroying something that was theirs. The police attendant answered, and I explained the situation as quickly as possible. Trespassing, destruction of private property, a couple of lunatics ripping up my children's dreams with a chainsaw. We're sending a vehicle, sir. I hung up the phone and turned my gaze to them. You heard? The police are on their way. The husband finally came to his senses and put down the chainsaw. Honey, maybe we should go. But she wouldn't accept losing. Never. We're right. He'll see. The HOA has power over these decisions. I let out a short laugh. The kind you hear when you're about to lose control completely. The HOA has power over my property? Then let's see what the police think. She rolled her eyes, but finally took 2 steps back. That's when sirens started echoing in the distance. She crossed her arms and sighed. Ridiculous. And all I could think about was how that woman was about to get a big surprise. The sirens echoed through the neighborhood like music to my ears. As the car approached, I couldn't take my eyes off her. The woman was still standing there, arms crossed, with that look of superiority that only people who have never been contradicted in their lives can sustain. Her husband seemed a little less confident, twiddling his thumbs nervously and looking around, as if looking for an escape route. The car pulled up right in front of my house. 2 policemen got out, both with that posture of someone who has seen it all, but still can't believe how stupid people are. The first one looked at me, then at the remains of the treehouse, then at the 2 of them. "What's going on here?" she asked, in a tone that already indicated impatience. Before I could answer, she stepped forward like a dramatic courtroom lawyer. "Officer, I'm glad you're here. This man is in violation of HOA rules and has refused to follow the standards set for the neighborhood. The structure he built was dangerous and illegal, so as responsible members of the association, we had to intervene." She spoke with such conviction that, for a second, I almost wondered if I was wrong. Almost. The policeman frowned. "Did you enter his yard without permission?" "Not really," she tried to argue. "As members of the HOA, we have the right to ensure that the rules are followed." The second policeman, who until then had just been analyzing the scene, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, just to clarify, did you destroy his property without authorization?" Her husband snorted and took a step back. "Well, technically, yes." Oh, how I wish I had a slow-motion camera to capture the exact expression on her face when he blurted out that confession. She turned to him with bulging eyes, as if he had just announced that he was leaving her to become a monk in Tibet. "What?" Her voice rose several octaves. The policemen exchanged glances. The first made a note on his pad. "So you admit that you invaded his property and destroyed a private asset?" "But it was illegal," she insisted, now more nervous. "It doesn't matter, ma'am. You don't have the right to go onto anyone's property and knock anything down. That's home invasion and vandalism." Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish out of water. Her husband seemed to have accepted defeat and just stared at his feet. The policeman spoke to me again. "Do you want to press charges?" Ah, that was the best question of the day. I looked at my children, who were in the background, still holding the remains of the secret barracks sign. The youngest was teary-eyed. "Yes." I want it. And that's when the show began. She went into absolute panic mode. You can't do this. It'll be ridiculous. He can't sue me for this. The first policeman put his pad away and crossed his arms. Yes, he can. Her husband tried to intervene. Look, we don't need to take this to that level, okay? It was a misunderstanding. I let out a bitter laugh. A misunderstanding is parking in the wrong space. That was a crime. She started mumbling something about lawyers, about how the HOA was going to ruin me, and even let out a, "It won't stay that way," which I honestly found hilarious. The police officers, however, were in no mood for her drama. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us for clarification." The silence was immediate. She looked at the officers as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "What? You can't be serious. Trespassing and destroying other people's property is a crime, ma'am. You filed a complaint here. So, yes, we are serious. I swear I saw the world fall apart in her face, and it was glorious. But I still didn't know that this story was far from over. The scene of her being taken away by the police was something I would never forget. The woman was in shock, her eyes wide, her mouth opening and closing without being able to form words. She had never imagined that she would be held accountable for her actions. Her husband, then, he was already resigned to life, staring at his shoes as if trying to teleport away. The police put them both in the car to give their statements. They weren't handcuffed or anything, but just the fact that they were being taken away was enough to shake the little empire of terror that this woman had built up in the neighborhood. But the war wasn't over yet, because I knew she wasn't going to accept losing that easily. 2 days later, I received a subpoena. The HOA was suing me. Yes, suing. The claim? Illegal construction, detrimental to the harmony of the neighborhood. According to them, I had violated the association's guidelines by building the treehouse, and therefore the HOA had every right to remove it. Ah, so now their crime has become authorized removal. Interesting. If she thought I was going to stay quiet, she was sorely mistaken. Because I went after a lawyer, and I didn't just hire any lawyer. I got the best specialist in disputes with residents' associations in the region, a guy who hated HOAs as much as I did at that moment. "This is a joke," he said, laughing as he analyzed the file. "Let's fight back." And we hit back with everything. We sued the HOA for trespassing. We sue the HOA for destruction of private property. We demand compensation for the emotional damage caused to my children. And the best part? We had proof. The recordings. The police officer's testimony. Her husband's own words confessing that they had entered my property without permission. The court battle began. The HOA thought they were going to bend me over. They thought I was going to give up, that I was going to give in, that I was going to bow down to their supreme authority. They were wrong. When we finally went to the hearing, the HOA sent a pompous lawyer who talked like he was arguing a case in the Supreme Court. But the truth was that they had nothing. The judge listened to the arguments. He looked at the videos. He read the depositions. And then he looked at me. Was the treehouse built within the boundaries of the property? Yes, sir. Did you receive any formal notice to remove it before this incident? Only anonymous notes left on the door and generic emails. The judge sighed and looked at the HOA attorney. So explain to me, why on earth did you think you could just break into someone's yard and destroy their property? The lawyer choked. The HOA went pale. And the woman? She was sitting in the back, squeezing the arms of the chair so hard I thought she was going to break them. The decision was quick. The HOA is wrong. Trespass and destruction of private property are crimes. You are entitled to compensation. I won. And not only did they lose, they were forced to pay a lot of money. After the trial, the HOA was in ruins. Their reputation crumbled. Residents began to question the leadership. And within a few months, the woman lost her position. She was no longer the queen of the neighborhood. She was just another despised neighbor whom everyone avoided. And what about me? Well, my children got a new tree house, twice as big as the first one. And this time, no one dared touch it. Don't forget to leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.